Howard Beach, Queens, New York, June 1987. 6-year-old Maria Rossi had never met John Gotti. But everyone in Howard Beach knew who he was. He was the man in the expensive suits who drove past in a black Lincoln town car. The man who threw the biggest 4th of July parties the neighborhood had ever seen. The man whose name you whispered, never shouted. Maria didn't know any of that. She was 6. All she knew was that her heart was broken, and her parents were scared. She had been born with a congenital heart defect, a hole in the wall separating the 2 chambers of her heart. For years, doctors had monitored it, hoping it would close on its own. It didn't. By the time Maria turned 7, the hole had grown larger. Her lips were turning blue. She couldn't run without getting dizzy. She couldn't play with the other children without collapsing. The doctors at Mount Sinai Hospital were clear. Maria needed open-heart surgery soon. Within the next 2 months, or the defect would kill her. The surgery would cost $32,000. Maria's father, Tony Rossi, was a construction worker. He made $18,000 a year. Maria's mother, Angela, cleaned houses. Together, they'd saved $7,000. Their insurance would cover nothing. Maria's condition was pre-existing. They needed $25,000 more, and they had 60 days to find it. This is the story of how a neighborhood came together to save one little girl. How they organized bake sales and car washes and raffles. How they collected quarters and dollar bills in coffee cans. And how on a hot Saturday afternoon in June 1987, John Gotti, the most feared mob boss in New York, stepped out of his car and said 3 words that changed everything. "I'll pay it." Tony and Angela Rossi lived in a small 2-story house on 159th Avenue in Howard Beach, 3 blocks from John Gotti's home on 85th Street. They'd lived there for 8 years. They knew their neighbors. They knew the shop owners on Cross Bay Boulevard. They knew the priests at Our Lady of Grace Church. And when Maria's diagnosis came back in April 1987, those neighbors stepped up. Father Michael O'Brien, the priest at Our Lady of Grace, organized the first fundraiser. A bake sale after Sunday Mass. Angela made ziti. Mrs. Carbonara made cannoli. Mrs. DiPietro made her famous tiramisu. They raised $400. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. That first night, after counting the $400, Tony sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not quiet tears, deep, body-shaking sobs, the kind that come from a place of absolute helplessness. Angela stood in the doorway, watching. She wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know how, because she felt the same despair. $400 out of $25,000. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. "We're never going to make it," Tony said. "We're going to lose her." "Don't say that," Angela whispered. "It's the truth. We can't save her. We don't have the money. We're going to watch our daughter die because we're too poor to save her." Maria's bedroom was directly above the kitchen. She was asleep. She didn't hear her father falling apart, but she would have understood. Even at 6, Maria knew something was wrong. She'd seen the way her parents looked at each other when they thought she wasn't watching. The way her mother's eyes were always red. The way her father's hands shook when he held her. She knew, and it scared her. Over the next 6 weeks, Howard Beach rallied. The community mobilized like they were preparing for war. Because in a way, they were. This was a fight for Maria's life. And Howard Beach didn't lose fights for their own. Week 1. A car wash at the Gulf Station on Cross Bay Boulevard. Local teenagers volunteered. They washed 127 cars, raised $635. 16-year-old Danny Russo worked for 5 hours straight, scrubbing tires until his hands were raw. When someone asked why he cared so much, Danny said, "Maria's in my little sister's class. She's a good kid. She deserves better than this." Week 2. A raffle at the VFW Hall. First prize, a television donated by Al's Electronics. Second prize, dinner for 2 at La Traviata. Third prize, a case of wine from Vincent's Liquors. Sold 842 tickets at $5 each. Raised $4,210. The VFW commander, a Vietnam veteran named Frank Giordano, donated the hall for free. "We fought for kids like Maria," he said. "Least we can do is help her fight too." Week 3. A spaghetti dinner at Our Lady of Grace Church basement. $10 per plate. 290 people attended. Raised $2,900. Mrs. Carbonara cooked for 3 days straight. She made 40 pounds of pasta. Her daughter tried to convince her to rest. "Mama, you're 68 years old. You can't stand at the stove for 3 days. Mrs. Carbonara waved her off. "That little girl needs a new heart. I can make pasta. What else am I supposed to do?" Week 4. Local businesses contributed. Gino's Pizza donated $200. The Howard Beach Pharmacy donated $150. Russo's Bakery donated $100. Smaller shops gave $20, $50, whatever they could. Shop owners put donation jars on their counters, signs in their windows. Help Maria get her surgery. Some customers dropped in change. Others dropped in $50, $100 bills. A man who worked at JFK Airport, someone Tony had never met, came into Gino's Pizza, dropped $500 cash in the jar, and left without saying a word. Week 5. A block party on 159th Avenue. Families brought folding tables into the street, sold homemade crafts, old furniture, books, toys, raised $1,200. Children sold lemonade for 25 cents a cup. Old men sold tools from their garages. Young mothers sold baby clothes their kids had outgrown. Everything for Maria. Week 6. Door-to-door collections. Volunteers walked through Howard Beach with coffee cans labeled Maria's Heart Fund. People dropped in coins. Dollar bills, $5 bills. One elderly woman on 161st Avenue, Mrs. Fontana, 82 years old, living on Social Security, gave $50. Her entire Checked for that week. Mrs. Fontana, we can't take this, the volunteer said. This is your grocery money. I'll eat toast for a week, Mrs. Fontana said. That child needs a heart. Take it. By the end of June, they'd raised $16,500. They were $8,500 short. And Maria's surgery was scheduled for July 15th, 2 weeks away. Tony Rossi sat at his kitchen table, head in his hands, doing the math over and over, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. $16,500 raised, $25,000 needed, $8,500 short, 2 weeks left. The doctors had been clear. If they didn't have the money by July 10th, 5 days before surgery, they'd have to cancel. And if they canceled, they'd lose their spot. Maria would go back on the waiting list. And Maria didn't have time for waiting lists. Angela stood behind him, crying quietly. Maria was upstairs, asleep, unaware that her parents were breaking apart, trying to save her. We'll figure it out, Tony said. But he didn't know how. He'd already borrowed from every relative who had money. He'd already maxed out their credit cards. He'd already sold his truck, his tools, everything of value they owned. There was nothing left except hope. And hope wasn't paying for heart surgery. Saturday, June 27th, 1987. 11:30 a.m. A folding table had been set up on the corner of 159th Avenue and 84th Street, right in front of Gino's Pizza. 3 volunteers, Mrs. Carbonara, Mr. DiPietro, and Tony Rossi, sat behind the table with a handmade sign, "Help Maria get her heart surgery." Every dollar counts. A coffee can sat in the middle of the table. A donation jar. People walking by would stop, read the sign, drop in a few dollars. By 11:30, they'd collected $43. It was slow. But they weren't giving up. Tony watched people walk past. Some stopped. Some didn't. Some gave $1. Some gave $5. Every dollar mattered. But Tony knew the truth. At this rate, they'd never make it. They needed a miracle. At exactly 11:47 a.m., a black Lincoln Town car turned onto 84th Street. Mrs. Carbonara noticed it first. She nudged Tony. "That's his car." Tony looked up. The Lincoln was driving slowly, almost like the driver was looking for an address. Then it stopped, right in front of the donation table. The back door opened, and John Gotti stepped out. Tony's first thought, "I'm going to die." He didn't know why Gotti was there. But in Howard Beach, when John Gotti showed up unannounced, it usually wasn't good news. Mrs. Carbonara grabbed Tony's arm. Her hand was shaking. Mr. DiPietro stood up, then sat back down, then stood up again. Gotti was wearing a gray suit, perfectly tailored. His hair was slicked back. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked at the table, at the sign, at the coffee can, with $43 inside. People on the street had stopped walking. They were watching, waiting. The whole block went silent. "What's this?" Gotti asked. His voice was calm, quiet. "But everyone on the street heard it. Mrs. Carbonara froze. Mr. DiPietro stared at his shoes. Tony Rossi stood up, swallowed hard. Mr. Gotti, we're raising money for my daughter. She needs heart surgery. We're trying to... Gotti raised a hand. Tony stopped talking. How much do you need? Tony hesitated. The surgery costs $32,000. We've raised most of it. We're $8,500 short. But we're still... What's wrong with her heart? She has a hole between the chambers. She was born with it. The doctor said if we don't fix it soon... Tony's voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence. Gotti stared at him. 20 seconds. 30. Tony felt like he was being evaluated, judged. Like Gotti was deciding whether he was telling the truth. Then Gotti turned to his driver, a man everyone knew as Jackie Knows. Jackie, how much cash we got? Jackie opened the glove compartment, pulled out a thick envelope. About $3,000, boss. Gotti took the envelope, counted out $3,100 bills, laid them on the table. Mrs. Carbonara gasped. Mr. DiPietro put his hand over his mouth. Tony just stared. That's $3,000, Gotti said. I'll have the rest to you by Monday. Who do I make the check out to? I don't... Tony couldn't speak. He was staring at the money on the table. 30 crisp $100 bills. More money than he'd ever seen in one place. The hospital, Mrs. Carbonara said quickly. Mount Sinai. You can make it out to the hospital. Gotti nodded. Monday. I'll have Jackie bring you a check for $5,500. That covers it, right? Tony nodded. Tears were running down his face. Your daughter, Gotti said. What's her name? Maria? Maria's gonna be fine, Gotti said. Not a hope, not a prayer. A fact, like he was telling Tony the sun would rise tomorrow. You tell her Uncle John said so. He got back in the Lincoln. Jackie closed the door. The car drove away. The crowd's reaction. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. They all just stood there, staring at the $3,000 on the table. Then Mrs. Carbonara started crying. Not quiet tears, loud, heaving sobs. Mr. DiPietro crossed himself. Once, twice, 3 times. And Tony Rossi collapsed into his chair, put his head in his hands, and wept. A small crowd had gathered during the exchange. Maybe 20 people. They'd watched the whole thing from a distance. Now, they started clapping. One person, then another, then the whole street. Applause. For John Gotti, for what he'd just done. Did you see that? Someone shouted. He just saved that girl's life, someone else yelled. That's our neighborhood, an old man said, tears in his eyes. That's who we are. Mrs. Carbonara stood up, grabbed the $3,000, and held it against her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Maria's going to live, she whispered. She's going to live. Tony couldn't speak. He tried. But every time he opened his mouth, more tears came. Mr. DiPietro put his hand on Tony's shoulder. John Gotti just saved your daughter's life. Tony nodded. He knew. Word spread through Howard Beach in minutes. By noon, everyone knew. John Gotti had stopped at Maria Rossi's fundraiser. given $3,000 cash, promised another $5,500 by Monday. Maria was going to get her surgery. She was going to live. And John Gotti, the most feared mob boss in New York, was the reason why. Monday morning, June 29th, 9:15 a.m., Jackie Nose showed up at Tony Rossi's house. He was holding an envelope. "From Mr. Gotti," Jackie said. He handed it to Tony. Inside, a cashier's check for $5,500 made out to Mount Sinai Hospital. No note, no explanation, just the check. Tony stared at it. Angela stood beside him, hands over her mouth. "Tell Mr. Gotti, tell him thank you," Tony said. "Tell him we'll pay him back. I don't know how, but we'll—" "Mr. Gotti don't want you to pay him back," Jackie interrupted. "He said this is a gift for Maria." Jackie turned to leave, then stopped. Mr. Gotti said one more thing. He said, "Make sure Maria knows there are people in this neighborhood who look out for each other." Yet Jackie walked back to the Lincoln and drove away. Tony and Angela delivered the check to Mount Sinai that afternoon. The hospital administrator looked at the check, looked at Tony, looked back at the check. "This is the remaining balance?" the administrator asked. "Yes." "Where did you get this money?" Tony hesitated. "Our community. They helped us." The administrator didn't ask any more questions. He stamped the check, filed it, smiled. "Maria's surgery is scheduled for July 15th. We'll take good care of her." July 15th, 1987. Mount Sinai Hospital, Manhattan, 6 a.m. Maria Rossi was wheeled into surgery. Tony and Angela sat in the waiting room, holding hands, praying. Father O'Brien sat with them. So did Mrs. Carbonara. So did half the neighborhood. The surgery took 6 hours. At 12:17 p.m., the surgeon, Dr. Robert Katz, walked into the waiting room. He was smiling. "The surgery was a complete success," Dr. Katz said. "We repaired the defect. Maria's heart is strong. She's going to live a normal, healthy life." Angela collapsed into Tony's arms, sobbing. Father O'Brien whispered a prayer of thanks. Mrs. Carbonara crossed herself 3 times. Maria woke up 2 hours later. She was groggy, confused. Her chest hurt, but she was alive. Tony and Angela stood beside her bed, holding her hands. "You're okay, baby," Angela whispered. "You're going to be okay." Maria smiled, then fell back, asleep. She spent 10 days in the hospital. Recovery was slow but steady. On July 25th, Maria Rossi went home. August 1st, 1987. Tony and Angela didn't know how to thank John Gotti. They'd tried calling. Gotti didn't have a listed number. They'd gone to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club on 101st Avenue in Ozone Park. The door was locked. A man standing outside said, "Mr. Gotti's not taking visitors." Finally, Father O'Brien had an idea. "Write him a letter," the priest said. "Give it to someone who knows him. It'll get to him." So Tony wrote a letter. "Dear Mr. Gotti, I don't know how to thank you for what you did for my daughter, Maria. Because of you, she's alive. Because of you, she's going to grow up. Because of you, she's going to have a life. You didn't know us, you didn't owe us anything. But you helped anyway. That's something I'll never forget. Maria asks about you every day. She calls you Uncle John. She wants to meet you someday to say thank you herself. We can never repay you, but we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to be the kind of people who help others the way you helped us. With deepest gratitude, Tony. And Angela Rossi, Tony, folded the letter, put it in an envelope, wrote Mr. John Gotti on the front. The next day, he walked to Gino's Pizza, asked the owner, Gino Amato, who everyone knew had connections, if he could deliver the letter. Gino took the envelope, nodded. I'll make sure he gets it. 3 days later, on August 4th, Tony received a response. It was a handwritten note on plain paper. Tony, you don't owe me anything. Maria's a good kid. She deserves a chance. Take care of your family. That's all the thanks I need. Tony framed the note. Hung it in Maria's bedroom. It stayed there for the next 35 years. Years later, in 2002, when John Gotti died in federal prison at age 61, reporters descended on Howard Beach to interview his neighbors. Most refused to talk, but a fellow unnamed, speaking on background, told stories. Stories about Gotti paying medical bills. Stories about Gotti helping families in financial crisis. Stories about a side of the dapper Don that the media never covered. One neighbor told the New York Times, he helped my mother when she needed cancer treatment, paid for it all, never asked for anything back. Another told the Queen's Tribune, when my father lost his job, Gotti made sure we had food on the table. Every week, someone would drop off groceries for 6 months. A third neighbor said people think he was a monster. And maybe he was to his enemies. But to us, he was a guardian angel. Why did John Gotti help people like Maria Rossi? There are several theories. Theory 1. Public relations. Some say it was strategy. Gotti knew that if the neighborhood loved him, they'd protect him. They wouldn't cooperate with the FBI. They wouldn't testify. They'd keep him safe. And it worked. For years, federal prosecutors struggled to find witnesses in Howard Beach willing to talk. Theory 2. Genuine compassion. Others say Gotti genuinely cared about his community. He'd grown up poor, one of 13 children in a tenement in the South Bronx. He knew what it was like to have nothing, to watch your parents struggle, to need help and have nowhere to turn. Maybe when he saw Maria Rossi's parents, working-class people, doing everything they could to save their daughter, he saw his own parents. And he helped because he remembered what it felt like to be helpless. Theory 3. A code. In the Mahia, there's a code. You protect your neighborhood. You take care of your people. You don't let innocent children suffer. Gotti followed that code. He was ruthless to his enemies. He ordered murders. He extorted businesses. He ran illegal gambling operations. But he also made sure the old woman on 161st Avenue had heat in the winter. He made sure the single mother on 158th Avenue could afford groceries. He made sure Maria Rossi got her heart surgery. It wasn't one or the other. It was both. John Gotti was capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary generosity. And to his neighbors, the generosity mattered more. Every year, from 1970 to 1992, John Gotti threw a 4th of July party outside the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club on 100 First Avenue in Ozone Park. It wasn't a small gathering. It was a production. Free hot dogs, free hamburgers, free steaks, grills set up on the sidewalk, folding tables everywhere, games for kids, face painting, a bouncy castle. And at night, fireworks, massive, illegal, spectacular fireworks launched from the rooftops. Explosions that lit up the sky like daylight. Red, white, blue, gold. A show that rivaled and many said surpassed Macy's famous display. Over 1,000 people attended every year. It cost Gotti tens of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. Nobody knew the exact figure. But people estimated $50,000, $75,000, maybe even $100,000 for the biggest years. But Gotti did it. Every single year. Even after he was arrested in 1990. Even while he was awaiting trial. The parties continued. Because to Gotti, the 4th of July wasn't just a holiday. It was a statement. It was his way of saying, I take care of my people. Maria's first party. July 4th, 1988. Maria Rossi attended her first Gotti 4th of July party in 1988, a year after her surgery. She was 7 years old, healthy, running around with the other kids, eating hot dogs with mustard and ketchup running down her chin, watching the fireworks with wide, amazed eyes. Tony and Angela stood on the sidewalk, watching their daughter play. For the first time in over a year, they weren't scared. They weren't counting money. They weren't praying she'd survive another day. They were just watching their daughter be a kid. She's beautiful, Angela said, tears in her eyes. She's alive, Tony said. Because of him. At one point during the party, around 8 p.m., just before the fireworks started, Gotti emerged from the Bergen Club. The crowd erupted, cheering, applauding, shouting his name. Gotti waved, smiled. He was wearing a white suit that probably cost more than most people made in 3 months. He looked like a movie star. Tony Rossi saw him, grabbed Maria's hand, started walking toward Gotti through the crowd. Security tried to stop him. 2 men in dark suits stepped forward, hands raised. But Gotti waved them off. Let him through. Tony, Gotti said as Tony approached. How's Maria doing? She's perfect, Tony said. His voice was shaking. Mr. Gotti, I don't know how to... Gotti cut him off. Don't. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything, Tony said. You saved her life. Gotti looked down. Maria was hiding behind her father's leg, peeking out at him. Shy, nervous. Gotti smiled. Knelt down so he was at Maria's eye level. You the one with the fixed heart? He asked gently. Maria nodded. You doing okay, kid? He asked. Maria nodded again. Good, Gotti said. He pulled a $20 bill from his pocket, handed it to her. Buy yourself something nice. Maria stared at the money. $20. To a 7-year-old in 1988, that was a fortune. She looked at her father. Tony nodded. Say thank you. Thank you, Uncle John. Maria whispered. Gotti stood up, patted her on the head, looked at Tony. "Take care of her," Gotti said. "Always," Tony replied. "Always." Gotti nodded once, then disappeared back into the crowd. His security formed a wall around him. People pressed forward, trying to shake his hand, trying to thank him, trying to touch him like he was a saint. Tony and Maria walked back to their spot on the sidewalk. Maria clutched the $20 bill like it was made of gold. "Can I spend it, Daddy?" Maria asked. Tony looked at Angela. Angela looked at Tony. "No, sweetheart," Angela said gently. "That's special. We're going to keep that forever." And they did. Maria kept that $20 bill in a box in her room for the next 30 years. When she got married, she brought it with her to her new home. When she had children, she showed it to them. "This is from Uncle John," she'd tell them. "The man who saved my life." Her children would ask to spend it. $20 is $20, Mom." "Not this 20, Maria would say. "This one's priceless." Maria Rossi is 43 years old now. She lives in New Jersey. She's a nurse. She has 3 children of her own. And she still has the scar from her heart surgery. A thin line running down the center of her chest. A reminder of the day she almost died. When her children ask about the scar, Maria tells them the story. About the fundraisers. About the neighborhood coming together. About the day John Gotti stepped out of a black Lincoln and saved her life. "Was he a bad man?" her daughter asked once. Maria thought for a long moment. "He did bad things," Maria said carefully. "But he also did good things. And the good thing he did for me, I'm only here because of him." Her daughter didn't fully understand. How could she? The world is simpler when you're young. Good people, bad people, clear lines. But Maria knows the truth. People are complicated. John Gotti was complicated. He was a mobster, a murderer, a criminal who spent the last 10 years of his life in prison. But he was also the man who paid for her heart surgery when no one else could, and Maria Rossi will never forget that. John Gotti died on June 10th, 2002, at the U.S. Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. Throat cancer. Age 61. 10 years into a life sentence. When news of his death reached Howard Beach, neighbors gathered outside his former home on 85th Street. They brought flowers, candles, notes. One note attached to the front window of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club read, "John Gotti, you were and always will be the true heart and soul of Ozone Park and Howard Beach. Thank you for everything." Another card, attached to a bouquet of carnations, said, "The neighborhood had always thought highly of you." Reporters interviewed residents, asked what they remembered. Most talked about the 4th of July parties, the fireworks, the free food. But some talked about the quieter moments, the medical bills paid, the families helped, the little girl whose life was saved. Maria Rossi didn't attend the memorial. She was living in New Jersey by then, raising her own children. But when she heard the news, she cried. Not for the mobster, not for the dapper Don, or the Teflon Don, or any of the nicknames the media had given him. She cried for Uncle John, the man who'd knelt down and looked her in the eye when she was 7, the man who'd told her she was going to be okay. And she was, because of him. That wraps it up for today. In June 1987, 6-year-old Maria Rossi needed a $32,000 heart surgery to survive. Her parents had $7,000. Howard Beach rallied. Bake sales, car washes, raffles, door-to-door collections. They raised $16,500. Still $8,500 short with 2 weeks until surgery. Then John Gotti's black Lincoln stopped at their fundraising table. He handed over $3,000 cash on the spot. Promised the remaining $5,500 by Monday. 2 days later, his driver delivered a check. Maria got her surgery, lived. 35 years later, she still has Gotti's thank you note framed in her home. When Gotti died in 2002, neighbors told reporters stories just like this. Medical bills paid, families helped, a modern-day Robin Hood. Was he a criminal? Yes. Did he do terrible things? Absolutely. But to Maria Rossi and dozens of other Howard Beach families, he was also the man who showed up when nobody else could. Sometimes people are more complicated than the labels we give them. If this story hit you, subscribe for more stories where the line between hero and villain gets blurry. See you in the next one.